Welcome to Wine for Normal People, the podcast for people who like wine, but not the snobbery that goes with it. I'm your host, Elizabeth Schneider, author of the Wine for Normal People book and certified wine dork. This show is sponsored by Wine Access, the go-to source of people in the wine industry for hard-to-find, limited production, high-quality wines at great prices. You can hop online anytime at wineaccess.com/WFMP. Let them know you found out about them through me, or better yet, let me make it easy. I'll select wines for you. Join my wine club and let me pick out 6 amazing bottles for you quarterly for just $150, which includes shipping. Go to wineaccess.com/normal to join and listen in the middle of the show for more details. I know so many of you love the Grape Miniseries, and I was looking back on what I have done in the past, and I have not updated Tempranillo since 2012. And I always think it's funny, some people will, if you're patrons, you can go back and listen to the back catalog. That's the only way you'll get access to the entire back catalog. Patreon.com/winefornormalpeople is how you can join and get access to that. But sometimes people listen to old shows and they hear me say something and they say, well, that's not true. And I'm like, well, yeah, because it was like more than 10 years ago. Things have changed even in the last 5. So I need to update some of these shows, and Tempranillo is definitely a grape that has come a long way. At least the understanding of it by the wine press and certainly by me, and my appreciation for it has grown. In another lifetime, before I actually went to business school and became, I guess, a real adult, I lived in St. John in the Caribbean. And I remember going to the beach with my little boyfriend at the time, and we had a bottle of Rioja. I think it was like Faustino Reserva Rioja. We thought we were so fancy. It was hilarious. We enjoyed a bottle on the beach that we could only hike to, and it was very fun. But I have a memory of that wine because it was really spicy and delicious, and that was sort of my only impression of Tempranillo. I didn't really know that much about it, even though I knew a decent amount of wine back then. I just think I knew a little bit more about French and Italian wine. But my understanding of Tempranillo has definitely changed over the years, certainly since that fun afternoon at the beach. And I think that the producers of Tempranillo have done a better job and have really honed in on what makes this grape so fantastic. So we're going to talk about this grape now, and I am going to skip the patron shoutouts this week. We didn't have a ton of new people joining, but I will get you guys next week, or actually the week after. I'm going to Croatia. I got to give a shout out to Brett from Walk and Wine, which is an amazing operation. I'm going to scout and see if that may be our next patron trip. Excited for that, Brett. Can't wait to see you. And I'm excited to try the wines of Croatia and, of course, report back on what I find. But let's stick in Spain, which is what a lot of this show will be about. However, I will tell you, Texas is doing a lot with Tempranillo. California is doing some. Oregon, absolutely. There's a little bit in Australia. 17 countries grow Tempranillo. That said, 88% of it is cultivated in Spain. So most of this, when we talk about the regions, is going to be focused on 3 main areas that do Tempranillo as their big wine. 2, Rioja and Ribera del Duero, are the really famed ones. And Toro is also very, very important. We'll talk about Navarra. We'll talk about a few other places as well. And then we will cover the other places that are up and coming. Tempranillo, at this point, behind Cabernet and Merlot, is the 3rd most widely planted wine grape variety. 231,000 hectares or 570,000 acres of Tempranillo exist in the world. The name Tempranillo comes from Spanish temprano, which means early. The grape ripens about 2 weeks earlier than Garnacha, which is its traditional blending partner in Rioja. It is an earlier ripening grape. As Spain's 2nd most planted grape after a grape called Ayren, which we don't see, it's not a super high quality grape, it's a white grape, the most planted in Spain. Tempranillo comes in 2nd at 20.8% of planting. So a 5th of Spanish vineyards, of which there are many, are planted with Tempranillo. Since the early 2000s, there has been huge growth in the Tempranillo vineyards of Spain. It has grown over 40%. Even though the national vineyard area in Spain, they've been pulling up grapes and vines, and so that has decreased by 15%, and we see Tempranillo plantings growing by 40%. When people are planting new vines, they are planting Tempranillo, it would appear. It is also widely planted in Portugal, 9% of vineyard area. It is the most widely planted grape in Portugal. Now, 21% in Spain is Tempranillo, and 9% would qualify you for the most widely planted red in Portugal. Portugal has many more grapes. They plant a diverse set of grapes, more diverse than what Spain has. And as a result, 9% is the best you're going to do for the highest percentage of vineyard area in Portugal. Tempranillo is versatile. I think it's misunderstood. I think people sometimes think because it can age well, people think that it might be a very heavy, bold wine. It can be made in that style. It can be made oaked. It can be made unoaked. It can be made blended. It does very well, both with oak and with blends. It can be fruity. It can be earthy. It makes rosé. Fortified wines. It is a major component in port. So lots of versatility for this grape of the Iberian Peninsula, really Spain's native grape. In terms of what styles you're going to get, climate will make a huge difference. Elevation will make a huge difference. There is a lot more to Tempranillo than I think a lot of wine people say is, oh, well, it's all about the oak and the winemaking. That's just not true. It's a really fascinating grape. If we talk about the history, it probably originated either in Rioja or in its neighboring area, Navarra, which is in the northern part of Spain. It's a cross of a white grape, actually, which is cultivated in Ribera del Duero, Madrid, Galicia still, Albio Mayor. And it is crossed with a grape called Benedicto, which is a black grape. It is super obscure, not something that people grow widely, but Albio Mayor, you could actually taste. Tempranillo has probably been grown in this area for millennia, but we don't have a lot of mentions of it. We don't have a lot of written evidence. I mean, Romans cultivated grapes in Spain and they cultivated the native grapes of Spain, but all we know is that it spread to Portugal probably around the 1700s. It was planted at a place called Quinta de Roriz, actually by a Scotsman, and the grape was called Roriz, which is now why in Portugal, although there are other names, the main name for Tempranillo is Quinta Roriz. It then spread to the colonies, Argentina and Mexico, a little bit in Chile, in Uruguay. Still see that today. The first reliable mention where we know it's actually Tempranillo was by Simón Rojas Clemente y Rubio in 1807. He was a grape scientist, an ampelographer, and he described it as a grape that was praised in Logroño, which is in Rioja, and Peralta, which is a place in Navarra. It wasn't really until 1807 that we have documented evidence, not so long ago, but we know this grape has been kicking around on the Iberian Peninsula for quite some time. There's over 550 clones of Tempranillo. Some are a little bit bolder, some are softer, and we'll talk about that when we talk about some of the regions in Spain. And that is an important fact because as people are thinking about planting grapes in the New World, they have to decide what they want out of the grape. And out of Rioja, if you're getting clonal matter from there, it may be a lighter style grape, even though some of that has to do with the climate. You might get a clone that's a bit more elegant or acidic versus the clone of Tinta del País, which is the name of the grape in Ribera del Duero, is a little bit heavier. So again, that clonal matter, it makes a big difference to what the New World might decide to plant. It is really interesting that at the beginning of the 20th century, 45 different grapes were permitted in Rioja. And by 1942, about 40 years later, 17 remained. But at that point, we had narrowed down Rioja to 7 grapes, 4 red, 3 white. The 4 red and 3 white were 99% of plantings. Those 4 red were Tempranillo, Garnacha, Masuelo, which is Carignan, and Graciano. By 1973, Tempranillo was 31% of Rioja plantings. By the 1990s, it took over Rioja, and today it is more than 80% of plantings in Rioja. There's also a white Tempranillo, which I will talk about later. There are at least 80 names for Tempranillo. It is really, really confusing. Some common ones in Spain, you have Tinta del Toro, that is from Toro. Tinta del País is the name for the grape in Ribera del Duero, or Tinto Fino, also used in Ribera del Duero. Aragon or Aragonés. Aragon is up in the northeastern part of the country, and that is the home of Garnacha. So interesting that people thought that maybe Tempranillo came from Aragon. You'll see that again in Portugal. In Valdepeñas in the south, it's called Sensibel. In Catalonia, it's Ul de Llebre. In Portugal, I already mentioned Tinta Roriz, but we also see it being called Aragonês. And in Italy, and I had no idea this was the case, the grape is called Malvasia Nera in Tuscany and in Basilicata. In California, it was for a very long time called Valdepeñas because it came from Valdepeñas. Probably that is where it was associated until they figured out that it was actually Tempranillo. So lots of different names. Like I said, there's 80 synonyms. People call it all sorts of different stuff. Terroir really influences Tempranillo. I'm going to prove that to you by talking about some of the different climates and the kinds of wines that you can get out of them. And then if you do a comparative tasting of Ribera del Duero versus Rioja, for instance, you will instantly see that Tempranillo is very strongly affected, yes, by winemaking, but also by clone, by climate and terroir. So from the climatic standpoint, Tempranillo can grow in a variety of conditions. It can grow on different aspects. For those of you who are patrons, you now know what that means because our tip was on aspect this week, the direction of the slope. It is not good with drought. It is also not good with a lot of rain. Cooler climates are better for maintaining acidity. Tempranillo tends to be a grape with lower acidity, but here's the problem. You need heat for color and flavor and ripeness of a grape. This grape does really well at high altitude. During the day, it's getting that heat and the sun to reach full ripeness. But at night, it's cooling down. So it can tolerate that daytime heat as long as it can cool down at night. And at high altitude, that's exactly what's happening. Those diurnal temperature swings, day-night temperature changes, allow the grape to retain acidity, which it can lack. So that's really important. Development of fruit and perfume. That's what Tempranillo is known for, with a longer growing season. It is sensitive, though, to changes in climate. So vintage variation can be huge from one year to another. You're going to get different flavors in the wine. Tempranillo can grow on a variety of soils, but in general, it does best on hillsides and in poor soils. Really like every other grape. Chalk, sand, limestone soils, some clay soils, but really these lighter, crumblier soils with good drainage are what is best for really elegant, stylized Tempranillo. The grape itself, I've already mentioned the name is from Temprano because it is early budding and ripening. Small, thick-skinned grapes, and they are in compact bunches, which is not super awesome for fungus and disease and rot, to which it is highly sensitive. And these bunches, it'll just spread the rot very quickly. You really have to be very proactive in managing Tempranillo. The grape is very dark in color. It doesn't, as I mentioned already, do well with drought. If you're in a dry area, irrigation will have to be available or there'll have to be a high water table, something like that. Doesn't do well if it's too hot. Extreme heat is going to make the grape lose a lot of its nuance. Too much rain, again, because it's sensitive to powdery mildew and other fungi. It also is susceptible to eutypa dieback, which I've discussed before. That's a trunk rot disease. And it doesn't do well in windy climates either. It's picky, and this is probably why Tempranillo has not traditionally been a grape that's been propagated elsewhere. It does really well in its homeland and in a few other places. People are trying it now. It's hard to get right. It is a great blender because, again, the failing of Tempranillo is not really its flavors. It has nice tannins. The problem for Tempranillo is its acidity levels. So sometimes it does better if it's blended with something else to give it a little boost of acidity. It has medium yields in cooler climates and extremely high yields if it's grown in warmer climates. If you have high yields, then you're going to have problems with low acidity. You're going to have low color. Irrigation and wire training can increase yields. And growing in a place where there's not fertile soils, where the climate may be a little cooler, is also going to help. I said I was going to mention Tempranillo Blanco. I will do that now. This is a white mutation of Tempranillo, which was found in 1988, growing in Rioja Oriental, which is the more Mediterranean climate, a little bit warmer, but with higher mountains in Rioja Oriental. And Tempranillo Blanco is authorized for white Rioja. It's actually really similar in the vineyard to Tempranillo, so hard to grow. Medium yields can be high in vigor, high in alcohol, but it tends towards citrusy, tropical, white flower notes. Our friends at Bodegas Otoñon make some beautiful Tempranillo Blanco, a really unique wine and quite delicious. You're not going to see it all that often. It could be part of a blend, but Tempranillo Blanco is definitely something that you should know about. All right, aromas and flavors. This is where I kind of hope that you're going to perk up and listen to this, because I feel like the descriptions of Tempranillo are just completely off. And as I just said, it will vary based on place and winemaking, but I think sometimes the descriptions of Tempranillo all have to do with oak. So I really want to concentrate on the other things that it can taste like and hammer home the idea that this is not a grape that's all about heaviness and oak. It has a lot more going on. Anyway, I'll stop giving you the prelude and just give you the information. It is best known to be an unbelievably balanced grape. When grown on the right sites, it has enough acidity to keep it fresh. It has smooth tannins. It has alcohol, sometimes big alcohol, sometimes moderate alcohol, depending on the climate. And it has a lot of nuanced flavors. From a fruit perspective, cherry, fig, strawberry, sometimes black fruit like plum or blackberries. If it's on the vine for a really long time, it's going to be like dried fruit with raisin and prune notes. But I don't know that people generally associate Tempranillo with strawberry, cherry, red fruit flavors. And it is a big part of Tempranillo. It is not all that dark black fruit. Maybe in Ribera del Duero, Rioja, it's much more red fruit. Another thing that I find so often in Tempranillo, especially lighter styles, wildflower notes, rose notes, earthy notes, and herbal notes are huge. Occasionally you'll find black pepper. Sometimes that's when it's blended with garnacha, which does have some black pepper notes, but sometimes Tempranillo alone can also show that. Then you introduce oak. Tempranillo has an affinity to oak. So it's not that I am trying to say that Tempranillo doesn't do well with oak, but it shouldn't be the only flavor. Here's the deal. American oak is the traditional oak barrel used for Rioja. American oak is wide-grained. And I always like to say that American oak is like Americans. We're a little bolder. We might be a little bit more out there with our opinions. European oak, especially French oak, a little more restrained, tighter grained, keep a little bit tighter to the chest. I think it's a good way to remember the difference. It's sort of a difference in personality. The oak reflects the cultures in some ways. So American oak is exuberant. That wide grain is going to impart a lot of flavor. It's going to make the wines like dill, tobacco, coffee, chocolate, lots and lots of vanilla and caramel. Coconut is really common as well. And that goes really nicely with some of those lighter flavors, especially in Rioja, or some of the bolder flavors in Ribera del Duero, although they do use a lot of French oak in Ribera del Duero. And then French oak is subtler. So you'll get some of the baking spice, cinnamon, nutmeg notes, but it will tend more towards cocoa powder or licorice. Just a little bit more restrained. You may get some toasty notes out of French oak. Also, age of barrel is going to matter. A lot of times those barrels are new, but sometimes they use used ones. If you use new oak, you'll get a lot more flavor in those wines that is more like vanilla and coffee and chocolate and baking spice than you will if they are used. So all of that is going to make a difference. Tempranillo can age really, really well. It has those nice tannins. And with time, it becomes like leather, truffle, mushrooms, decaying leaf, nuts, earth. That might not sound appealing to everybody, but trust me, when you have it, it all just sort of comes together. It tastes like fall in a glass sometimes, especially those Reserva and Gran Reserva wines, which we'll talk about when we talk about the aging criteria. The texture, I mean, if it is grown in a cooler climate, Tempranillo will have a lot of elegance. It'll be lighter. It'll have some acidity. It'll have moderate, smooth tannins that are not over the top, won't be very astringent, especially if it's been aged for a while. Usually medium-bodied in cooler climates and full-bodied in hotter climates. And of course, the acidity will vary. In hotter climates, it will be lower. In cooler climates, it will be higher. You'll have higher alcohol in warmer climates and more tannin, with lower acidity. And in cooler climates, you will have lower alcohol, you'll have more moderate tannins, and you'll have higher acidity. Winemaking. Here's a surprise. If you go back and listen to the Rioja series I did last year, Tao, who represented Rioja Alavesa, talked about how carbonic maceration, which we usually see in Beaujolais Nouveau, is pretty common, especially in Rioja Alavesa. They do this very quick in-berry fermentation. They cover the grapes with carbon dioxide in a tank. There's intercellular fermentation. You get some nice dark color. The flavors tend to be a little bit more fruity and candied. Are we seeing those on shelves? Not so much. That's a lot of local tradition. But if you happen to taste a young wine and it tastes like it's a little bit like a Beaujolais Nouveau, that's what has happened. There's carbonic maceration, either partial or full. That is something that is done in Rioja, but not elsewhere, because in other parts of the world where Tempranillo is grown, it's all about that affinity to oak. Most Tempranillos are made in the traditional way. You bring the grapes in, you press them, you macerate, you crush, you ferment, blah, 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 blah. The difference with Tempranillo is aging is really a big thing all around the world. It's not just in Spain. Barrels are used to soften some of the astringency and the tannins. They are used to create some of those nuanced flavors. The thing about aging Tempranillo is that each winemaker has to look at the grapes and decide what is suitable for which level of aging. And some years they may decide, you know what, none of the fruit is good enough to put into a Gran Reserva. It is not bold enough. It's not strong enough. It's not interesting enough for us to put this in an oak barrel for many, many years and hope that this is going to be one of our great wines. Instead, we will do less aging and we might make a Reserva, or we might make what's called a Crianza and just release more of those wines and no Gran Reserva. Gran Reserva is really only supposed to be made in the best vintages for wines in Spain. So the traditional producers are going to use American oak for long periods of time. Some do a mix of French and American oak to give it interest and depth. Modern producers want more velvety wines. They want richer wines. They are going to age the wines for less time. They're going to use new French oak. So you have to figure out who's a modernist, who's a traditionalist, who's in between. And that matters in Ribera del Duero and in Rioja and in Toro. So let me talk about the aging criteria for Tempranillo in Rioja and Ribera del Duero. It is important to know, again, these are the main Tempranillo areas. You have Generico or generic. This is released a year or two after harvest. It's fresh and fruity. Also, they put anything that doesn't fit into the other aging categories. If it was aged a lot longer, if it was aged in amphora or concrete, they might use Generico, and it could be a very expensive wine. So don't necessarily think that just because it says that it's a cheap and breezy wine, although a lot of times it is. This category used to be called joven or young. Crianza is the category of everyday yet sophisticated wines. It is held for 2 years, 1 year in oak barrels, either American or French or whatever you like. They are fruitier styles. They might have some oak notes. They might have some of those herbal notes. They are fairly simple wines. They can be delicious. Where we get into more serious wines is Reserva. Reserva is aged 3 years between oak barrel and bottle, 1 year in oak and at least 6 months in bottle. What did they do with the other year and a half? Usually they're going to store it in oak, but they could put it in amphora or something else to give it some texture. They could add more time in bottle to allow the flavors to marry. These wines are much more complex than Crianza. They are fruity. They have oak notes. They have notes like tobacco and leather and truffle. This is where things get more complex. Tempranillo starts to show those tertiary notes, as we call them, from aging. And Gran Reserva is a 5-year minimum aging, 2 minimum in oak, 2 in bottle. These are made in the best years from the best sites. They are complex. They have intense aromas. Gran Reservas are the best that the winery really has to offer. Let's thank my sponsor, Wine Access. They're the best online site to find interesting producers that you can't get anywhere else. I am a busy single parent. I'm a business owner. I don't always have time to shop when the stores are open, to be honest. So I love that I can hop online anytime at wineaccess.com/WFMP, wineaccess.com/WFMP to get into the site. You can do that too and let them know that you found out about them through me. Or you can let me make it easy for you by selecting your wines for you. You can join my wine club. You let me and the Wine Access team pick out 6 amazing bottles for you quarterly for just $150, and that includes shipping. To do that, you're going to go to wineaccess.com/normal to join, wineaccess.com/normal. They have awesome relationships with Spanish producers. They regularly offer amazing Tempranillo-based wines from Rioja, Ribera del Duero, other regions. You can really get a sample of what great Tempranillo tastes like from Wine Access. You can test them out and see how they differ based on region and terroir. Wine Access is awesome. Join my club today, wineaccess.com/normal, wineaccess.com/normal. And just a reminder, if you want to help keep this podcast alive and support the work and have more awesome Grape Miniseries, please consider joining Patreon, patreon.com/wine for normal people, patreon.com/wine for normal people. I cannot do this podcast and I can't do anything I do without the support of patrons. It's not that expensive. It starts at $2 a month and it supports the work of this podcast. It allows me to continue to provide awesome content for you. So patreon.com/wine for normal people. And if you want to give yourself a gift, you can take a Wine for Normal People class. winefornormalpeople.com/classes. Super dorky. It's like a live podcast. I'm there. You're with a group of really cool people. We all get together. It's on Zoom. It's a really fun community. People love the classes because it feels like you're in the classroom with people and people get to know each other that way. And then when they do get to meet live, it's even more fun. So really great opportunity to learn. Obviously, I'm a huge dork, so I will teach you everything I possibly know about the subject. Wines of Germany is coming up. The Great Reds of Italy is filling up very quickly. If you're interested in taking that, I know a lot of you want to take that class because you know that I have a special affinity for Italian wines, and I certainly can provide a lot of information about that. That is coming up in November. I might even squeeze in a class on Croatia, depending on how my trip goes. Go to winefornormalpeople.com/classes. Sign up for the newsletter if you want to be informed when new classes come up. You can do that on the website as well. And now let's get back to the show. These wines have already been aged for you. This is one of the best things about Rioja and Ribera del Duero, 2 premier regions for Tempranillo in the world. They don't release wines until they are ready to go in your glass to be consumed. Can you keep them for longer? Absolutely, you can. You can keep them for 20, 30 years in some cases if it's a very well-made wine from a great vintage, a great producer. But you do not need to wait to open these wines. These wines have a lot of staying power, a lot of flavor, but they're also ready to drink right now. So you don't have to make this decision. Anytime you buy a Reserva or Gran Reserva, you can drink it really at any time. The winemakers are not releasing it until they feel that it's ready. And then it's up to you when you want to drink it, whether you want to age it a little bit longer or have it whenever. Let's talk about the regions. The thing about Spain is it's hard for me to tackle it because we're going to be talking about the 3 places that are very big for Tempranillo, but it is planted in 28 DOs, Denominación de Origen. There are 28 places that authorize Tempranillo. It's planted everywhere. There's not that much in Galicia, which is the land of Albarino and Mencia. And there's not a whole lot in Andalusia, which is in the southern part of the country because it's just too hot for Tempranillo. But pretty much everywhere else, you're going to find Tempranillo. It is only a main component and a famed component in about 3 or 4 places, which I'm going to discuss. Rioja clearly being the number one. Rioja really should be thought of as a west to east region. In the west, it's more Atlantic influenced. It's closer to the Bay of Biscay. It's getting cooler Atlantic breezes. There's more rain. It's much colder, higher elevation. And then as you move away from the Sierra Cantabria Mountains and you move into Rioja Oriental, it becomes more Mediterranean. The mountains create natural barriers. They will temper the cold and the rain from the Bay of Biscay in the northwest. They will also, in the south, temper those dry winds from the central Spanish plateau, the Meseta Central, and from the Mediterranean as well. So this is a moderate climate region. The West is definitely cooler because of the Atlantic. The East is lower altitude in many spots, not in the high mountains, but in the many spots. And it's drier, but they do have good day-night temperature swings. It's more continental or Mediterranean in Oriental. The wine quality is often determined by altitude. Best wines grow at altitude. Also, calcareous clay soils found predominantly in Rioja Alta and Rioja Alavesa. That's great for Tempranillo. I've already mentioned they lower the yields. One of the things about Tempranillo, you got to keep the yields in check if you want flavorful grapes. So I'm talking a lot about these three regions. There's Rioja Alta, cooler, higher elevation, closer to the Atlantic. The most traditional styles of Rioja, these are earthier. They tend to be less fruity. They tend to be medium-bodied, lower alcohol, very food-friendly wines, very age-worthy. These are the most classic styles. Rioja Alavesa is actually in the Basque Country. It's slightly warmer than Alta, and the wines are fuller and fruitier. They're still earthy. They're actually really quite similar, Alta and Alavesa. They tend to be lighter on their feet, acidic. They tend to be very food-friendly. Some of the wines from Rioja Oriental, because it is influenced by the Mediterranean and is the warmest and driest area of Rioja, can be very fruity with lower tannin and acidity. But because of the traditional style of Rioja being in the best producers, something that is lighter, a lot of producers do not make wines just from Oriental, unless you're at elevation like Bodegas Otoñon, where Raquel, in the podcast that I did with her on Oriental, talked about how if you're in a high site in the mountains, just like everything with Tempranillo, you're going to have strained wines. That's a little bit different, but a lot of times those wines from Oriental are very fruity and rich. Rioja Tempranillo, again, I can't say this enough, balanced, elegant, blend of fruit, of that wildflower, herbal note, earth, and then some oak, especially in the longer aged versions like Reserva and Gran Reserva. They can also make great rosé in Rioja because the Tempranillo maintains its acidity. And one of the keys to having great rosé is to have some acidity in it. Rioja absolutely can do that. Top Rioja producers, well, there's so many. I'll mention a few. Artadi, God, my dad is so obsessed with their wines. He was like, how do I get more of this? Cune, Viña y Jalba, López de Heredia, Marques de Murrieta, Marques de Riscal, Montecillo, Muga, Palacios Raimondo, Remolluri for a more modern style, La Rioja Alta, Bodegas Otoñon, Finca Allende, Contina, Roda. There's so many. That's just some of the top Rioja producers. There are beautiful, beautiful wines being made in Rioja by so many people. I would try to hone in on what style you like from whom, and then you can get more of those styles because there are people making more of the traditional wines, more of the modern style, fruitier, more restrained, whatever it is. There's a lot of combinations, but I will tell you, in general, even the fruitier styles are going to be lighter and more elegant out of Rioja than they will be from the next region that we're talking about, which is Ribera del Duero. Ribera del Duero, the grape is not called Tempranillo. It is called Tinta del País or Tinto Fino. Those are the names for the clone of Tempranillo. Ribera del Duero is south and west of Rioja. The name means the banks of the Duero River, which eventually turns into the Douro River in Portugal. It follows the Duero for about 70 miles or 115 kilometers upstream from Valladolid, and the vineyards along the river go up to these limestone cliffs. This is where the valley is meeting the Meseta Central. The Meseta Central is an elevated plain of the Iberian Peninsula. It's flat and rocky. There's some sand here, chalk and limestone. Again, those infertile soils. There are some pockets of alluvial soils that are a bit more fertile, but chalk, limestone, really good water retention during drought. Also, the vines are digging quite deep, so they are going to get nutrients and they're going to have more flavor and they're going to struggle a little bit. That will reduce yields. The vineyards in Ribera del Duero average 600 meters or 2,000 feet. They have such extreme climates in this part of central Spain. Blazing hot summers, 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Is not uncommon as a daytime temperature. They have short, very cold winters where the vines can have extreme frost risk, diurnal temperature swings. 50-degree Fahrenheit swings or 20-degree Celsius swings, that's going to slow ripening. During the night, these grapes are really shutting down, and that's going to take them a while in the morning to get going again. It is hot during the day, and then we start that cycle over again. There is acidity in these grapes. Is it as high as the acidity in Rioja? Generally not, because the days are hotter. But Ribera del Duero has an incredibly long growing season, usually 20 days longer for Tempranillo than Rioja. The grapes are harvested with very high levels of color and flavor, very pure fruit flavor, lots of intensity. And there's different parts of Ribera del Duero that will give you different types of Tempranillo. In the West, there's something called the Golden Mile. Vega Sicilia, which is the most famous Ribera del Duero in the world, one of the most expensive wines in Spain. Glacial sandstone, limestone soils, lighter soils, very aromatic Tempranillo. In the center, you have Pingus, which is extremely famous. Pesquera, another very famous winery. And these are fruitier wines. And then up and coming in the further east area, the highest altitude in Burgos, clay, limestone, alluvial soils, those are very big in fruity wines. Clay is going to give you more density in the Tempranillo, and it's bigger tannins as well. The Tinto Fino clone, which is basically the only thing grown in Ribera del Duero, or Tinta del País, is black fruit. This is less red fruit. It's more like blackberry and black cherry, black plum, whereas other Tempranillo is more like red fruit and herbs and flowers. This is all about the heavy black fruit. 35%, more than a third of the vines are 25 years or older. A lot of them are more than 100 years. What does that mean? Intensity in the Tempranillo. Deep roots, so they're going to be able to survive the harsh climate, lower yields, and more powerful wines. So when you think about Ribera del Duero, think much more concentrated Tempranillo than in Rioja. If you're looking for something lighter and very food-friendly, Rioja may be the wine for you. Ribera del Duero has a lot more power. That said, given the cool nights, it retains acidity, which Tempranillo has a hard time doing. So it's fuller bodied, but it's not cloying. It still has nuance. It's intense, but at the same time, it has some acidity. The other thing about Ribera del Duero, they have the same exact aging criteria as Rioja, same rules that I've already laid out, but they use French oak. They really don't use American oak in Ribera del Duero. It used to be that Ribera del Duero was pretty much all just vanilla, cinnamon, baking spice, tobacco, all about the oak. And it was not about the wine and about the flavors, but that has changed a lot. And now they are much more terroir driven. They don't taste only of oak now. They've focused a lot on making sure that the acidity is there, because that didn't used to be a feature of Ribera del Duero either, even though it was possible given those diurnal temperature swings. Some producers, the more traditional ones, will use American oak. You won't find that often. It's really a French oak region. Again, another difference with Rioja and the way that they treat Tempranillo. Some places, both in Rioja and in Ribera del Duero, are doing single vineyard wines to let the terroir show through. Or they might be blending from different areas, different zones to get different flavors. A combination of maybe the cooler north-facing vineyards with the warmer south-facing vineyards to get a bit more nuance, different soils, different altitudes. So much more sophistication than probably the last time I did this podcast in 2012, where Ribera del Duero was sort of a hammer. Rioja was finding its legs and its identity. Everything has really changed and come together. Top Ribera del Duero producers, I've already mentioned, Vega Sicilia, Emilio Moro, Protos, which also makes, by the way, my favorite, Rueda Verdejo, Pingus, Pesquera, and Mauro. They can be expensive. Vega Sicilia is super expensive, and so is Pingus, but some of those other brands are really affordable and delicious. Toro is the last major Tempranillo region that I'm going to cover. I will mention Navarra and Penedès because they do have significant amounts of Tempranillo. Toro is near Ribera del Duero. It's to the west. It's even hotter. It is at altitude. It's similar to Ribera del Duero in that it has hot summers, cold winters. It is in the Meseta Central. Here there are alluvial soils with some limestone, very extreme climate conditions like Ribera del Duero. Powerful, intensely flavored wines. They use the clone Tinta de Toro. These are very full-bodied, high alcohol, strong tannin wines. If that is your jam, Toro is there for you. Toro wines also have their own aging criteria. Crianza, Reserva, Gran Reserva, same as what Rioja has. But we just see a lot less Toro because in the world of Tempranillo, if we're trying to think about what are the best wines, Toro is not making it if you're considering Ribera del Duero or Rioja. Great Toro wines, Bodega Numantia, Pintia, and San Roman are great producers in Toro. Navarra, I'll mention quickly. It's just north of Rioja. They're really known for old vine Grenache, and then they had focus on French varietals. Now they're making a play back for Garnacha. Just north of Rioja, lots of microclimates. They have varied Tempranillo expressions. They have not done a lot in terms of forwarding their Tempranillo production. Tempranillo is made here, and depending on the conditions of the area, they can be light or they can be rich and full. So that is the Tempranillo from Navarra. Penedès, there are some very warm areas and they can make beautiful Tempranillo expressions as well in the mountains there. Like I said, 28 DOs, and I've just mentioned 5. So there are many other expressions of Tempranillo in Spain, but those are the major ones. We'll move to Portugal, where there are 3 main areas for Tempranillo: the Douro Valley, the Douro, and Alentejo. It is the second most planted grape in the Douro Valley, one of the 5 recommended grapes for port, and it's blended with the others, Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, adds color, body, and then some of those beautiful wildflower, wild cherry, red cherry, black pepper notes that it's known for in Spain. Just like in Spain, the best vineyards are at altitude. That's going to give you the best acidity, the best perfume. The soils in the Douro Valley are mainly schist. They are rich in minerals. So Tempranillo or Tinta Roriz can wind up being very tannic here. It's also used in table wine blends as a major component with Touriga Nacional. Touriga Nacional is the main red of the Douro Valley, but you will see Tempranillo or Tinta Roriz in the blends of the still wines, and it can add just what I said before, body and aroma. Touriga is going to take the lead on the tannins and the acidity, or you might add Touriga Franca for some acidity. And Tempranillo in the Douro, in the still wines of the Douro, is going to be used really for all of its beautiful aromas and flavors. Great producers in the Douro, you have Quinta dos Carvalhais, Quinta do Crasto, and Quinta de la Rosa, great wines, and then of course all the famous port producers. In the Douro, Touriga Nacional is the main grape, just as it is in the Douro. When they use Tempranillo or Tinta Roriz, it is used to beef up the wines, creating richer, fuller wines. It's blended with Touriga and Mencia. Mencia is known as the Jeanne grape. So there's lots of different expressions of Tempranillo. The Douro uses it as a backup player. Alentejo has put a lot of effort into making dry Tempranillo called Aragonês. Again, the thought was that it was from Aragon. It is considered Alentejo's best variety. The problem for Alentejo is it is hot. Tempranillo has to grow on cooler sites, and it has to be harvested when the fruit still has acidity and the tannins aren't too rough, just like everywhere else. Tempranillo does well at high altitudes in Alentejo, and there are high altitude sites in Alentejo. That said, you're going to get fuller bodied wines from Tempranillo from here with lower tannin, low acidity, dark fruit, but they can be very nice wines. They're usually pretty cheap too. Cortes da Coma, Esporão, and João Portugal Ramos are good producers out of the Alentejo area. There's some in Lisboa also. If you are looking for some good wines, they will likely say Aragonês on them. Interestingly, France has some Tempranillo, mostly in the western Languedoc-Roussillon, right near the Spanish border. That makes sense. They use it for blending. Italy, I've already mentioned, in Tuscany and Basilicata, it is called Malvasia Nera. We're not quite sure how it wound up becoming Malvasia Nera, but if you hear that, or if you read that that's in a blend, it could be Tempranillo. It could also be another type of Malvasia. But in Tuscany or Basilicata, likely it is Tempranillo. Also grown in Switzerland, in Malta, in Turkey, lots of different little pockets of Tempranillo, but really we're talking about Spain and Portugal. The Iberian Peninsula is the home of Tempranillo. And then we have the New World. Remember, I talked about before the clones. So depending on the clones that they took, whether they're clones that tend to be fuller, like Tinto del País or Tinto Fino from Ribera del Duero versus some of the Riojano clones, you're going to have different flavors. Australia has been growing it in places like the Barossa Valley, in McLaren Vale, in Heathcote. It grows in hot regions. One of the bigger problems in Australia, controlling the yields. Tempranillo loves fertile soils, likes to crop big if it can. And so that's been a problem in terms of controlling the yield in Australia. The wines tend to be spicy and fruity. This goes along with Australia's push for alternative varietals that are going to work in a warmer climate. I have not had any Tempranillo from Australia, so Australian listeners, please report back to me. Let me know how they are. I'm sure they're quite good. Argentina, this grape arrived over 300 years ago. Here's the thing. Argentina's focus is Malbec and Cabernet Sauvignon. There is some Tempranillo in Mendoza, in San Juan, in La Rioja, which makes sense, named after the original region. Really wasn't getting a lot of attention, was just a glugger. But now some people are working on it. Some great producers, Au Fournier and Zuccardi, doing some Tempranillo that is improving. So Argentina may be one to watch. The U.S. has done some really interesting things with Tempranillo. In California, the grape arrived about 100 years ago. It was called Valdepeñas, likely indicating that it is from the south, from the Valdepeñas area of Spain. It was grown only in the Central Valley. The Central Valley is really hot and it is really fertile. All the things that we said don't lead to great things for Tempranillo. So nobody was that interested in Tempranillo except that they grew it for jug wine and they grew it for fortified wines. Again, if they're copying the port model, they use Tempranillo in port and Tinta Roriz in port. Yeah, they're going to try to grow it there. Now we see a little bit in the Central Valley. There's more growing in Paso Robles, in the Santa Ynez Valley, in Santa Barbara, in Napa. Jarvis is noted in Napa as having a good Tempranillo. My friends at Truchard make a Tempranillo in Carneros. Lodi also. Lodi is quite warm, but they do have some good day-night temperature swings. Some interesting things going on in California if you get your hands on a Tempranillo. Washington State also grows Tempranillo. It has been in the Yakima Valley since 1993. In Oregon, it arrived a year later in 1994. In the Umpqua Valley, this is in southern Oregon. You're not going to see this in the Willamette where Pinot and Chardonnay reign. Abbasella Vineyard specialized in Tempranillo. They still do. They started the idea that Tempranillo could be really great in the Umpqua Valley, and they have succeeded. Today, almost 400 acres in Oregon, 100 Tempranillo producers, mostly in that southern portion. Texas. This is growing in Texas Hill Country. It's humid. It's tough there. The Texas High Plains is where some of the best Tempranillo grows. It's hot, dry, similar to parts of Spain, not Rioja, but maybe more like Ribera del Duero. This is one of Texas's most important grapes. It can be light or spicy. And like everything else, depending on the clones, depending on where they're growing it, the hang time, all of that, I think the best producer, well, honestly, I think probably the best producer in Texas is Spicewood, Ron Yates. I haven't had Ron Yates wine. He has his own brand, but he makes Spicewood. And of all the Texas wines that I've had, Spicewood is my favorite. And the Tempranillo is fantastic. So I highly recommend that. Other parts of the New World, British Columbia, Mexico and the Valle de Guadalupe, Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, South Africa. New Zealand has some. Trinity Hill and Elephant Hill are two producers. Everybody's growing a tiny bit. Pairings. We have a grape with, especially in Rioja, with moderate tannin in Rioja, good acidity. And then we have bolder, stronger wines out of Ribera del Duero, out of parts of Texas, Alentejo. So for those lighter style wines, you could even have something like paella with saffron, with seafood. A spicy chorizo with a nuanced Rioja might go very nicely. Spanish tapa, something simple. Serrano ham, manchego, brie for young wines. And for aged Rioja, aged Gouda. For the heavier, more powerful wines where you have higher tannins, lower acidity, and more fruit, barbecued meats would be perfect. Smoky flavors, brisket, pork, ribs, grilled vegetables that have a char on them would be really good. You can have Rioja with grilled foods as well, but you want to do something more with herbs and nuance. The bigger Tempranillos, those big, bold ones, are going to go better with heavier dishes where maybe there's less nuance in the food. The wine can stand up to that. It's sometimes hard to find wine that's so bold it can stand up to smoky flavors, but that is going to go quite well with the bolder styles of Tempranillo. A couple serving notes. First of all, if you have of any sort a Reserva or Gran Reserva or an older Tempranillo from the New World, you will want to decant those wines. How long? You got to start tasting it at about 20 minutes after it's been in the wine glass or the decanter to see. But those wines need some air to come back alive. Don't just pop and pour. Those wines need a little bit of time, so definitely decant them if they are older. Serving temperatures. Well, I always say serving temperature matters. It does affect the flavor of the wine. Some people say to serve it between 60 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 to 18. I prefer, especially Rioja, cooler. I think it should be more at 55, which is about 12 or 13 degrees Celsius. Maybe for the bolder, more modern styles, you can think about 60, 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 to 18 degrees Celsius. But I think that for the elegant styles in particular, you want to stick more on the 55 to 60 degree Fahrenheit, which is wine fridge temperature. If you don't have a wine fridge, pop it in your refrigerator for a while. You definitely do not want to take these wines and just pop and pour, especially the Ribera del Duero. That wine is going to taste very flat unless you chill it a little bit. It's going to need help boosting up the acidity and some of the aromatics. Don't leave it in there for too long. The tannins can get harsh if you let it get too cold. Serving these red wines a little bit cooler, great idea. That is the Tempranillo refresh. It is a lot of information. I hope that you enjoyed this one. I know most of you love the Grape Miniseries so much. Go out and try some Rioja, Ribera del Duero. If you can get your hands on some Texas or California Tempranillo, go for it. And with that, this has been another episode of Wine for Normal People. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.